Hello, good evening and welcome. It's us again and we're talking about allotments and growing again tonight. We've noticed quite a few people doing questions and answers on YouTube. Well, we're not a large enough channel to get nominated to do that, so we thought we'd do our own questions and answers ourselves. And as you already know, this is Paul and I'm Richard. And I've written out a few questions that I'm going to ask to Paul, because Paul is the expert grower in this household.
In this household,
yeah. So we thought we'd just do some questions that might help you in your growing experience and obviously give you a little bit of insight into our lives. So Paul, tell me, when did you first get interested in growing stuff?
It was when I was about 5 or 6. My mum and dad owned a B&B in Guernsey, and Dad used to grow vegetables which Mum would use for all of the guests that were coming. And I think it was a very early age Dad started getting me out into the garden with my brothers as well, and we would just grow things. And he got me entrenched into growing at an early age. And then when we moved house, when I was about 7, I think it was, to be closer to Dad's work. My dad was a docker, my mum was a waitress and also had the B&B, but gave up the B&B when we moved house. We had a big back garden with 13 mature fruit trees, pears and apples, and a plum, and a huge area for growing vegetables. And that's when Dad and I got the real bug.
And in terms of your dad, and for those of you who don't know, Dad passed away 2 years in July.
Yeah.
Yes, that was a very sad time for us, but we're not going to dwell on that, but we just thought we'd let you know. What was the most valuable thing that you learned from your dad?
Give it a go.
Or just give it a go and see what happens?
See what happens.
Yeah.
If you're growing something and it doesn't work, it could be because of the cold, it could be because the seed doesn't germinate correctly, you've overwatered it, you've underwatered it. But if it doesn't work first time, give it a go. And there are many people at the moment who are sowing tomatoes and peppers and chilies and things like that indoors, and they're hoping to move them outdoors or into a unheated greenhouse or polytunnel soon. And we're supposedly having this big chill around the corner. So it could be that some of those actually succumb to a big chill, and they'll need to re-sow for this year. So I think the most important thing is give it a go. And I think that's the same with anything in life, really.
Well, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, look at all the trees and the plants now that are starting to bud and bloom. I mean, we've got a couple of blossom trees out already.
Plum.
The plum is out. I think is it viburnum?
Yeah, that's out.
That's out. And also a cherry is about to start.
Yeah.
And there's a cherry down the road.
Yeah, that cherry
out
down the road is
very early.
Very dark as well.
So, you know, all those things could get knocked out by this supposed big freeze. Mind you, it feels pretty cold today.
Yeah.
It's cold now. I'm frozen. Anyway, thank you, Paul. So, when did you get your first plot?
Well, the first plot in this house.
Well, no, I mean first plot ever. Have you had a plot before?
Well,
No?
Dad gave me my own growing plot when I was about 9, and that was about 2.5 meters by 1.5 meters. It was, and it was my own little plot, and I grew lots of peas on it, and I grew beans on it.
So can you remember what you grew first, ever?
The first thing I ever grew was parsley, and I sold it on the roadside. I sowed it in little pots, and then put them into little peat modules, and I sold them for, I think it was 10 pence per parsley plant, And in Guernsey, you have a lot of honesty boxes.
Even now, they still have honesty boxes everywhere. It's lovely.
It's a delight.
It's lovely.
And
if you haven't been, visit Guernsey. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's fabulous. It's the best place in the world. But yes, I used to sell parsley, and then I sold tomatoes, and then we used to sell windfall apples as well.
Lovely. I think I had a little garden, a tiny little garden. I never grew anything in it.
Why not?
Because, to be honest with you, and sorry Dad if you're watching, but you know, I was never particularly encouraged. My parents really weren't gardeners. My grandmother was a gardener, and my granny, they were both gardeners. But my parents, no, they were never really.
What did your gran and granny grow?
Well, I remember Grandma, they had a greenhouse with tomatoes, that's all I remember. My granny used to grow all sorts of things. They had lots of spring bulbs in the garden. I always remember the snowdrops and crocuses in spring in their garden, and the bluebells. They had a huge garden with masses of bluebells. But no, I don't really remember my parents really gardening as such. Cutting grass. Mind you, when we were kids, we probably ruined any garden that was there by running around crazily in it. So, anyway. Okay. So, Paul, how do you do your planning for the plot?
I use an online program.
What's it called?
It's called, I can't remember what it's called.
Well, that's no good for the viewers.
No, it isn't. Well, we'll put it up on the thing. Put it up down here.
We'll find out. We'll put a little banner on.
But there's various.
Is it easy to use?
Yeah, it's very easy to use.
Okay.
I find it very easy to use. You just have to say how big your plot is, and then you can put the various elements in. I know Sean James Cameron also uses it because I've seen him plotting his or planning his new plots. And I think it's widely used. There's a number of different companies that you can get it through, but there is one company I think that sort of runs it more.
And if you weren't using a computer, what would you do?
I just draw on a bit of paper.
You just draw it out.
I do A4, measure it out to scale, some type of scale, as accurate as possible, and then just put the beds in, and then plan and use a pencil and put this is going to go here and this is going to go there.
Just plan it out. I noticed that that's the way that Vivi does hers. A shout out to Vivi's Kitchen Garden, because that's a great channel that we both really love.
We say, is there a Vivi on?
Yeah, is there a Vivi on tonight? And we always watch Vivi. She's great. I know she draws hers out on paper. And I think it's quite important to plan, though, isn't it?
Oh, I think it's important to plan. I think if you're going to grow, use the space as much as you possibly can. It's good to plan, because you know that you can put your broad beans in November. They're going to come through, or they'll come through early, but they'll be harvesting in sort of May, June. Then you can say what's going to follow on from them. And that's where planning really works. However, if you're just going to have a plot and you want to grow beans and tomatoes and lettuce, then you just grow beans, tomatoes and lettuce, and you do that as it says on the packet. Obviously, within the UK, it's warmer in the south than it is in Scotland and in the Scottish Isles.
So it depends on the region that you're in as to what will grow when.
Yeah, so you might see on a packet that something needs to be grown February to March.
Yeah.
Well, it might be that you can grow it in February in the south, but you need to sow it a little bit later if you're further up north.
Let's think about this time of year, February, cold, damp, freezing. Do you find it easy to get motivated, or do you procrastinate?
I'm a procrastinator, but when it comes to the growing, I sort of want to get on and do
Well,
things.
we're talking about the growing, Paul,
Yeah.
aren't we? So,
So-
do you how?
No, I don't procrastinate about the growing.
Right.
I look at the weather and I say, should I sow now or should I sow later?
Well, no, I'm thinking, getting down to the plot, things like that.
Oh,
What stops you from getting down to the plot?
well, work, having to do my
Yeah.
work.
And
But I'm fortunate enough that I can take an hour out or 2 hours out to go down to the plot
yeah,
and do things.
yeah. So you don't procrastinate when it comes to the plot. You just get on and do what you need to do.
Yeah, I think mostly.
Yeah. Well, some people, find it very hard to get out of the house.
Yeah, they do. I mean, I because of what we've had recently, we've had
Yeah.
a few challenges
Yeah.
in December and January. It's been I've needed to get out of the house.
Yeah. So it's been good to
So
get
it's
out.
been good to get
Yeah.
out. But like anyone, if it's nice and warm inside and it's cold outside, then
Yeah.
sometimes it feels like a big thing to
Mm.
wrap up into 4 or 5 layers and just go out the front door.
So let's think about the growing season. Let's think about the new season and the things coming up. When do things really start to take off? What time of year? When are things really motoring ahead and get really busy?
I think everyone will be busy, everyone will be busy in the UK in March and April, and because they'll be busy sowing, they'll be busy pricking out and potting things up and putting things into larger pots, sowing things in the ground. So there's a lot. I mean, most people who have windowsills or a polytunnel or a greenhouse, March and April, they'll find that there's very, very little space to put anything else. So sowing is a big thing. But at the moment, I mean, this weekend I think we're going to sow some brassicas. We're also going to sow leeks. We might sow a few other things, but we'll wait on the tomatoes and peppers and that type of thing for a couple of weeks yet. We could actually sow them now in the house, but with this big cold snap that they're thinking is coming in the next fortnight, it might get to a point where things start getting a bit leggy, and we don't want that. So
Why would they get leggy? Is it because they're in a heated environment?
it's because they're not getting the right level of light.
So they're reaching for the light?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And the heat is making, if the heat inside will make them want to grow,
Okay.
and they'll be reaching to get to the light that isn't strong enough,
Okay.
and that will make them leggy.
Okay. What's your favourite vegetable to grow?
Borlotti beans.
Why?
They're so easy. They're pretty. Mind you, it could be pumpkins as well. I like beans because you put the wigwam up and they scramble up the wigwam or the line of A-frames of bamboos, and because we're vegetarian, so we eat a lot of pulses, so we grow our own beans, and we grow our own beans for drying and also for freezing. What I didn't realise last year, and again Vivi showed us, that you could actually harvest beans when they're fresh and then just freeze them. You don't need to dry them, or if they're semi-dry you can freeze them. So obviously anything that is bone dry needs to be bone dry, so beans, if they're going to be dried for dry keeping, need to be dry. But beans, I think, are my
Your
favourite
favourite.
things.
And I think also they're very evident, aren't they? They're very they're very there in the garden. They
Yeah.
grow huge and they flower, and then they produce all these beans, and you can see what's going on. Whereas, the root vegetables, they're under the ground and you're not too sure how they're doing. And we grew potatoes one year, didn't we? And they were beautiful, bushy plants. And then there were no potatoes. There was nothing.
Nothing.
Like a couple
Absolutely
of tiny
nothing.
little things, and that was it. It was useless. So, yeah, you can see them growing. Okay, so,
But there's lots of other things
yeah, no, but we just
Yeah.
wanted to focus on one, your
Borlotti.
favourite.
Borlotti.
Okay.
Oh, I did do butter beans last year. Love them.
Yeah, but you can only have one favourite. Okay,
Beans,
so beans in general, I think, are one of our favourites.
but tall ones.
So, what pests have you encountered on the plot, and how did you deal with them?
Well, slugs, obviously. Slugs and snails everybody has. But on our plot at our allotment, we have lots of frogs,
Mhm.
and they tend to keep that down. If you want the frogs on your plot and you've got grass, it's best not to keep that grass too tidy, because if you keep it too tidy and there's no hiding spaces for frogs, they'll go to somebody else's plot.
Yeah.
So if you have a pristine plot, frogs won't. But last year we had the usual things of aphids on the broad beans. They came. We had blight last year on the tomatoes. Fortunately, most of the tomatoes
We'd
have been
harvested most of them, yeah.
but actually not too many. It's mainly aphids, and we had very, very little carrot fly.
Because you don't use any chemicals, do you?
No.
No, we don't use any pesticides, nothing like that. Okay, what's your biggest mistake and how did you rectify it? Have you made any mistakes?
Oh, you make a lot of mistakes. I mean,
Well, what's your biggest mistake? What did you go, oh, shoot?
I think the biggest mistake I make regularly is turning too quickly.
What do you mean turning too quickly?
Turning too
physically?
quickly. Physically,
All
turning
right.
too quickly, and
It's because
knocking,
we're old now. We're old now.
and knocking the seed tray with lovely, vibrant, growing plants
That's not really a mistake,
onto
is it?
the floor.
That's an accident.
It's an accident, but that's a mistake. If I was slower, if I took more care, that is a mistake.
Yeah, I was more thinking that you maybe had grown something and you hadn't followed the right instructions and it hadn't worked and you wish you'd done it a different way. No?
No, I think, well, I mean, there are things, but you just learn. I mean, I did grow Brussels sprouts this year. I sowed them from some seed and grew them, and they were Brigitte, and they were very small
But they were
compared to the other.
nice. They were nice, though.
Well, I mean, the ones
Tasty.
at our community gardens are lovely, but there are so many there.
Yeah.
And they're about, I mean, we saw them on the video the other day, they're about 4 or 5 foot long, the stalks. But the Brigitte ones, which are the ones at our allotment, are only about 2.5, 3 feet tall, and they are like thumbnail sprouts. And even though they're lovely, I think I must have done something wrong to them because they should have grown larger.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so who are your favourite gardening YouTubers?
Oh, well, Vivi's
Vivi's Kitchen Garden, brilliant channel,
that-
really entertaining, lots of different variety on that channel.
And you get to know about Vivi, which I like. It's
She's
not just
lovely.
about the gardening, it's about her life, her sewing, and all of that. And that's fab.
Who else do we
Sean
watch?
James
Sean
Cameron,
James Cameron we watch, yeah.
and he's just in the process over the next year of moving plots. That's interesting.
Yeah, really interesting.
Purple
Thank you,
Sweet
Sean.
Pea.
Purple Sweet Pea, yeah.
We like her and her family.
Lavender and Leeks.
Lavender and Leeks, like her ironmongery, and that. Colliery Garden, I think it's Rachel from Colliery Garden, really like her. Hugh's Nursery, really good. Charles Dowding as well, there's huge information for no-dig philosophy on there, and in fact his books. But there are so many petals on paving
There's
stones.
loads. I mean, there are so many YouTube channels with gardening on it. It's fantastic. I subscribe to huge numbers. I don't really know when I'm going to get time to watch all of the videos. I mean, we spend most of our spare time late in the evenings watching TV and YouTube. There's just not enough hours in the day to absorb and ingest all of the information that is given. But you know what? Us YouTubers, we're out there doing it, which I think is great.